The daily update from Chinese officials, 213 people have died from this new coronavirus. The number of infections in mainland China is nearing 10,000 now, the biggest spike in a day we saw yesterday. Internationally, more than 120 cases, but importantly, no deaths outside China. Just a short time ago, Russia, which had yesterday closed its border with China, announced its first cases of the virus. Word of 2 cases in Siberia, as a matter of fact. Britain, 2 cases being treated in hospital in the north of the country. Italy as well, seeing the virus for the first time. Yesterday, the outbreak was officially labeled a global emergency. The World Health Organization made that distinction, made that declaration, and we want to talk more about that with Christian Lindmeier, who is a spokesperson for the WHO, and my guest from the headquarters in Geneva. Mr. Lindmeier, thank you very much for being with me this morning.
Thanks for having me, Heather.
I have many questions. Let me begin with this. The decision-making behind this declaration of a global health emergency, what changed to make that declaration necessary?
So by last Thursday, when the emergency committee, all these experts were undecided, we did not yet have this international spread, and that's an important criteria. What we did have was travelers carrying the virus over the borders into other countries. But this onward transmission that we have seen since then in a couple of countries, Germany, Japan, the UK now apparently also in the US, Vietnam, that is something which is new. And that is a development which we had been looking out for, and that the emergency committee members even had specified they would look out for. Now that happened. This is an emergency situation for global concern.
But
the rising
it strikes me that
cases
we may
in China
have been,
come on top of it.
We've seen it now into the U.S., Japan, Taiwan, Germany, Vietnam, France now today. I mean, that's where we are today. But it strikes me we were talking about human-to-human transmission very early on, days ago. Maybe not to the degree we are today, but we certainly were talking about it already presenting.
Oh, correct. And that's why this emergency committee even met last week already and was convened because of the concerning situation. But the criteria, which are quite officially written down in a treaty, in an international treaty amongst all member states of WHO, specify certain criteria. And this onward transmission is one of them, the threat for international health. So this criteria has now been met. And that's what a global emergency has been called. But make no mistake, there was no measure which could have not been taken before by individual countries or by the community. So nothing was prevented to be done before that call was made.
And we certainly saw various countries with various responses. But how now does this does the WHO calling this officially a global health emergency? How does that help?
It is, first of all, an important political sign. It's a sign, a wake-up call for countries around the world that we do have a situation which one country alone cannot stem anymore. Meaning the outbreak in China is bigger than just for China to fight it alone or for even the region there. It needs global cooperation. And we've seen this already in the beginning of the week. For example, with the Australian lab announcing that they have cultivated the virus, and they're happy to share the sequencing. Something like this is important for cooperation in order to identify the virus, to work against it, and to find means against it. But more so, it also needs a concerted action to help countries with a weaker health system. Canada, Germany, Japan, the US, they have strong health systems. They can cope with individual cases coming across their border. They will identify them, they will isolate them, they're monitoring them, very important, of course, treat them, and they're also checking on the contacts of these people to see if this has onward spread.
Exactly. I mean, we're
but other countries
that
may not be in that position.
No, I know, just pointing out Canada, because you're quite right, we're hearing similar messages from our health officials here. So the emergency status now, how then should Canadians interpret the change?
For the individual citizen, not much will change. You may see, traveling in and out of countries, stronger measures at the borders, and you should see them, frankly said. You should see checks on temperatures, on travel history, on possible signs of infection. But all these measures are individual pieces of a puzzle because, for example, temperature measuring cannot be the only help at all, because we know that a certain amount of people may not even have symptoms or may have low fever or no temperature and still have the virus. So that's why all these measures together need to be put in one big bowl and the whole community works together. Let's not forget, the individual can protect himself best as you would against the flu. It's a very flu-like behaving virus to this point, and that's the best measure you can do.
There's been much discussion after the declaration yesterday about the system of when exactly to declare a global health emergency, and musing publicly about whether a new approach or a new ranking system is needed, something more tiered, like a level 1 through 4, or different colors, for example, rather than it's not an emergency and then suddenly now it's an emergency. Is that something the WHO is now going to look at?
Absolutely. So you're absolutely right. So far we have a black-white system. So it's either yes or it's no. It's an emergency, it's no emergency of international concern. And as you could see until now, it is, although it's a very technical term, it's very confusing to member states. It's very confusing to the individual, not knowing what this is now. So a sort of a street light system, a green, yellow, orange, red, anything which can kind of escalate in certain steps would be most likely a better system. So the Director General yesterday already announced that they want to look into this and see how they can implement that in a better way.
Because I wonder, as you said, it maybe adds to global citizens' confusion, but also there's already concern and fear surrounding this when suddenly it's not an emergency and then suddenly it is. I wonder if it really has run the risk of exacerbating the fear factor significantly here.
No, I agree, and you're exactly right with this. So before, people were concerned that it was not called an emergency, and they were worried that don't we see cases and you don't name it anything. And now the opposite is true. Now it's nearly a fear, a scare that there is suddenly a global emergency. So it would be better labeled differently to make it also more visible or more clear to people that this is an escalating situation, not a 0 to 100 in no time.
I'm wondering, we heard yesterday from your Director General considerable praise for the Chinese response, this unprecedented public health mobilization, the largest we've ever seen, really. It's been extraordinary. But just a few moments ago, reports out of Beijing and from CCTV, so the Chinese television, quoting the Communist Party secretary from Wuhan, so right in the epicenter, that the city should have taken virus containment measures earlier. The effect would have been better. That's a quote from CCTV this morning. I'm just wondering whether, what that adds. You're praising China's response. Now they're saying we could have done things better. Now we're in an emergency situation. How certain are you that we are, in fact, seeing a significant and appropriate and an effective response in China now?
Better is always the enemy of good, if I get that phrase right. So they definitely have done a lot in China. In the beginning, they shared immediately that there is an outbreak. They shared the information which was available. They did measures in China to try to contain this. But let's not forget, in nearly every outbreak like this, everybody will only look for serious cases, because that's what you first see, obviously. Only now, over the course of 5-6 weeks, has it come out that there may be people with mild symptoms, with very mild symptoms, or even asymptomatic. So in the history, of course, talking the last 4 or 5 weeks, if there were asymptomatic cases in the beginning of a disease we didn't know, how would you identify them? So this is a tricky go about, and the technical experts will tell you this is a very typical scenario. You first see serious cases, and then you continue looking further and further and further, and then you find more cases, and hence the cases also explode on the statistics, and you will find more people who are also succumbing related to this illness.
I'm going to have to leave it at that, but I appreciate the information this morning, and we'll be continuing to be in touch with you because obviously this is something. We have 3 confirmed cases here. This is a story that we are preoccupied with as well. Thank you, Mr. Lindmeier. I appreciate it. Christian Lindmeier is a spokesperson with the WHO, and he is in Geneva today.